You are listening to the Cattle Call podcast. This is the place where computer-aided design and drafting meets humor and practicality, with a touch of business acumen thrown in for fun. Jim and Rocco, the owners of Zentech Consultants, the premier U.S. technology consulting firm for architecture, engineering, construction, and manufacturing, discuss the fascinating world of CAD with some humor and some honesty. The Cattle Call podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Cattle Call podcast with Jim and Rocco from Zentech Consultants. I am Jim, your surprisingly charming host, and with me, as always, is my partner.
Sorry. Charming.
Hey, I'm very charming. I'm charming and cute and lovable. I'm all of the above.
All right, so let me tell you guys. So just before we recorded this podcast, he told me he was hearing voices in his head.
Well, doesn't everyone? So long as you're not ordering me to kill you again, we'll be fine. Notice the key functional word there was again. Alrighty. All right, Rocco. So you're going to make fun of the voices in my head. They tell me I must give you the engineering joke of the week. You ready for this?
Ready.
Okay, ready? How many software engineers does it take to change a light bulb?
How many?
None.
One?
That's a hardware issue. There you go. All right. All right, folks. So today I want to talk about the differences between building information models, or BIM, and 3D models, right? And how do you know which one you need? I think a lot of us tend to use those two terms interchangeably, but they're actually very distinct from each other, and they're targeted at very different processes. And on today's show, I want to get into not just the differences, but I'm probably going to annoy a few folks, beyond Rocco, who I annoy every day. But I'm going to annoy some of the folks listening by pointing out what I feel are some misdirections, misuses, and maybe even some flat out lies that we've bought into as an industry with one or both of these model types. So let's start with some rough definitions on the differences, right? Just so that we're kind of all on the same page here. And then I'll get into my concerns on, which one you should be using. And let's start with 3D models. These are pretty basic in concept. They're usually a solid masked object representing your structure, your project in 3 dimensions. They're going to have, basic constructible. The word is constructible. It didn't want to come out. Constructible components like, your doors, windows, ceilings, floors, furniture, equipment, and a million other things. And you can put those in place to actual size and actual scale, right? It's pretty much what you'd expect in a 3D model, right? And I think the confusion between the two systems is that, at least visually, BIMs have exactly the same things as the 3D model. And the real difference here lies in the metadata, or the properties that are tied to each component of the model. A window may look and print and measure exactly the same way in both a BIM and a 3D model. But the difference is in the embedded information, right? My 3D model says that this item is a window, right? And I can get maybe the overall size measurements, and that's about it. Whereas, a BIM of the same component is going to tell me the window size, the window make, the model, the manufacturer, the glazing thickness, the insulation value, the rough opening sizes, what type of mounting screws are needed, and any one of 100 other details that are included. And that's the difference. Right? BIM is much more intelligent than 3D, right? And we've always been told that that's the best way to go. And that makes sense, right? I mean, more is always better. Well, no. And that's where I'm going to drop the BS card here and start annoying people, because I think that around 80% of the time, BIM is a complete waste for most of us. So we'll get into that. All right. So Rocco, when clients come to us for help or training in this area, they always say they want BIM. But is that really what most of them are after? Or is it much more about workable 3D models and they just don't understand the difference?
Yeah, it depends on the situation. But I do think that um, there is confusion out there still even today, right? I mean, it's funny because the best is when you get an inbound inquiry or somebody calls in and says, "Hi, I want to learn about BIM." And it's like, okay, we can help you. What are you looking for? And then when they start talking to you, it's really learning how to work in 3D.
Yeah.
That's ultimately what they want.
Yeah, that's what I say. There's just a lot of that going around. People who just really don't understand the difference. All right, so I tell you what, let me get into some detail on why I think most of us don't need BIM on a regular basis. Look, CAD development software companies have been pushing the BIM concept for a decade and a half now, as kind of the be-all, end-all of the design and construction world. And they've done that for a reason. Because they're the guys developing and selling you the BIM software. They've been telling us over and over that 2D drafting is dead, right? And what they call quote unquote dumb 3D. Oh, it's a waste of time and it's a waste of money. You need that intelligent data of BIM in order to build in the modern world. None of that's true. The fact is, if you look at your design build jobs, almost half are still done completely 100% in 2D and printed as PDFs or off on paper for construction, right? Of the remaining half, most of them are using what people call BIM, but it's just being done at a level of development of 200 or 300, right? Which means that they're mostly just graphic representations. Essentially, what you're calling BIM is just that dumb 3D model that we've been warned about, right? But you're buying and using very expensive, very complex BIM systems to create those 3D models with. Look, all of the stats and the research show that less than 10% of construction jobs use or even benefit from true BIM processes. The reality is that the level of information that BIM starts to bring once you get to level of development LOD 350 plus, right? It's a complete waste of time and money for most of us, right? Unless we're working with very large projects, right? With, integrated project development, structures, contractual requirements for it, all right? And we're dealing with the ongoing support or the turnover of that BIM data, right, to the owner or the client for their, facilities management, right, which most of us aren't getting paid for anyway, so we're not doing it. And now look, I know there are people out there listening, right, particularly, the BIM and VDC managers who are getting very angry at me right now because they're using BIM for pre-con conflict checking and 5D scheduling. And the reality is you're not. You're usually working with a 3D model and not BIM, right? And here's what I'm going to say. In point of fact, BIM data can actually be a massive hindrance rather than a benefit on most jobs. All right, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But so look, Rocco, let me ask you this, right? We train on tools, right? Like InfraWorks and Navis and so on, that let construction people handle all of the processes that I just mentioned, right? How many of those clients believe that they need BIM features to handle that type of work on every job?
No, it's few and far between. I mean, it's like you said. I see most people asking for 2D, construction drawings and plans, and it's there's a limit as to how much they even need in 3D. So
yeah,
you take it to the BIM level, and it's a whole other level that that a lot of folks in construction just don't have the training or experience to work with, and they don't need it like you're describing.
Yeah, no, absolutely, that's the case, right? So, and like I said earlier, right, I think the BIM can actually be a hindrance on a lot of jobs. So, let me explain what I mean by that, right? So, BIM data, it can be remarkably detailed. And it's pitched to us by the software companies as a must-have, right? But the reality is, for most design build applications, it's overkill. that dramatically increases the size and the complexity of our design files and our design and build processes, right? A BIM at LOD 300 is almost double the size, or it can be almost double the size of the same corresponding 3D model, right? And you're going to require a much more expensive BIM system to even, open it and work with it, right? On top of that, most of that data is just a waste, right? You need to look at who the targeted end user of that data is, right? And who's putting it in place. For the most part, the people who are using BIM are architects and, mechanical and structural engineers and the like. They're not the people who are going to actually build or install these designed components, right? They're actually only responsible for identifying, all the minimum safety requirements and the expected methods of construction, right? So if you go back to the window example that I mentioned earlier, right? If you're having the architect, right, on the design plan put in the make, the model, the manufacturer, the hardware, the installation data, it's a complete waste of time, since the GC is going to send this thing out to bid and he's going to get submittals back from 20 different subs, each one of whom is proposing to use a different make and model of window. So that data is meaningless, right? Subcontractors and installers are not going to take the time to develop BIM plans for a bid. It's just too complex, takes too much time, costs too much money. It's not feasible. So, all of that data that, the designers have put in place from their giant BIM system is just clogging your plans. It's a complete waste, right? And the truth is, the GC and the subs usually never even look at it or even know it's there, right? Look, to put it simply, you've put in the capacity to add construction data, but the only people using the tool are the designers, right? Don't get me wrong, BIM is a really, really useful tool for, the designers who are handling, the design parameters and calculations and so on. But it's mainly just overkill for the construction world. And look, I will say this, right? That is less of an issue if you're doing one of those IPD, integrated project delivery projects, where the builder and the designer, work closely, right, to optimize costs and with the owner, and they're working as a team. But even though that is true, it is the case, right? The reality is that 82% of all construction projects still run off of the traditional design, bid, build methodology, right? Not IPD. Most of them don't touch that, right? All right, so that's where I wanted to point out. So I tell you what, let's take a break to hear from today's sponsor. And when we get back, I want to talk about these two different systems, right, or the different systems and methods you can use for working in both BIM versus 3D, and the good and bad of each, right? So stand by, folks. We'll be back in a minute with more of the Cattle Call Podcast. All right, everybody. The sponsor for today's episode of the Cattle Call Podcast is Matterport. Now, you guys know Matterport. They've been all over the world. We see them all the time getting, 3D laser scans and photogrammetric digital twins for all of our real estate development houses and all of that great stuff we see out there. But what I really want you guys to understand about Matterport is that it does so much more than just those static models. One of the really amazing things that you can do with Matterport is you can integrate links and hyperlinks to dashboards and controls. We can link to videos. We can link to warranty information, manufacturing information. Think of it like this. If you could go into a digital twin model, have your clients and your coworkers walk through it, pick a piece of equipment, click on it, and get all the information on the make, the model, the manufacturer, when it was last updated, how much does it cost, how do I order a new one, anything that you could conceive of, whether it's in a manufacturing space, a facility management system, or on the construction job site. We can do all of that and so much more in Matterport. It's not just 3D scanning, it's a lot more. So Rocco, why don't you tell these folks how we work with Matterport and how they can reach out to find more?
Yeah, whether it's the integration with Bluebeam, products like Bluebeam or Procore, or even Adobe, we can help you from the consulting standpoint. If you're looking for help on the scanning end, we can help. If you're looking to buy the cameras, we can help. So feel free to reach out to us. Website is zentechconsultants.net. Give us a ring, 866-824-4459, or drop us an email, sales@zentechconsultants.net.
There you go, folks. Matterport's so much more than you ever thought it was, and sponsoring the Cattle Call Podcast.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Cattle Call Podcast. We're talking about BIM versus 3D models, right? And if you really need BIM in your workflow process. And in the first half of the show, I pointed out that for most of us, the answer is probably no. And on this side of the break, I want to talk to you about the processes for developing each model type and what systems and so on that you'll want to look at. And I'm going to start here with the tool that really began the BIM revolution and has almost become synonymous with it, and that's Revit. Look, Autodesk developed Revit from the ground up, right, with its entire focus being built around the BIM concept. It was never just a 3D modeler, even though that's where a lot of us started with it, and it's what a lot of us still do with it. But it was always intended to create the BIM industry, right, where we'd all work in one gigantic data space. Now, look, I do think that there was good intent there, right, to centralize and integrate design data. But to be fair, there was also a big business focus in creating an entirely new arena, right, in which Autodesk was the only big player. And look, yes, of course, there have been others. But, since Autodesk essentially, built and pushed the BIM concept out to most everyone in the world, they garnered a massive share of the design build space by constantly pushing it as the must-have process for almost 2 decades now. And I think that, the problem that a tool like Revit faces is that it's too complex and it's too expensive for everyday use by most of us. Look, if you're a CAD and design dork like me, right, we learn it and we love it. But builders and installers simply don't have either the time or the resources to devote, right, to working with that level of information, right? I mean, at best, right, they're going to work with maybe 5% of it. And at worst, they're just going to ignore it and ask the architect, can you just give me a 2D PDF plan? So, Rocco, with our construction clients, how many of them feel really comfortable or even effective working in the BIM space?
Yeah, it's funny, as you were talking about Revit, I remember the days. I remember when Revit was first acquired by Autodesk back in like 2002 and 2003, and it was like this big vision of what Autodesk was going to do with it, and it's still taken a long time for people to really embrace BIM and still understand it. And to address your question, there's particularly in construction, very, very few people are working in 3D, let alone utilizing BIM to its full extent. Again, it's primarily what I see is 2D being used throughout.
Yeah, it's still a huge part of what we do, and I don't think that's ever going to change. But, with that said, I will say that, 3D modeling, all right, just general 3D modeling, not Revit necessarily, has been a godsend, right, for both design and for construction, particularly on larger jobs. I think, being able to, visualize and to conflict check and even generate plans and sections and elevations from a well thought out 3D design, it really helps everyone in the design process, right? From the system designer through the owner's final deliverables and, ongoing facility management, everything. I think essentially just building a project in 3D in the digital space, it helps us identify and eliminate a ton of issues before we ever get out in the field, things that we wouldn't notice in 2D. And we can verify, what fits and what doesn't and what pipe is hitting which duct and a million other constructability concerns in the digital world. So, we don't wind up with, countless change orders and, cost and schedule overruns in the real world. And that's a benefit to everybody involved. And I know a lot of people listening are saying, well, Jim, that's what BIM does too. And it has even more information. And you're right, it does. But the information BIM provides, right, while it's vital to the design staff, most of the time is useless to the builders. Right? There are just too many variables, options, processes, and alternates available in the real world for any designer, right? Particularly when most of them really don't usually understand actual construction processes, right? They can't fully incorporate all those options into a definitive BIM setup. Look, I cannot tell you how many times I've seen things like structural components that have been designed in BIM, right, by architects and engineers, and the installers laugh when they look at it because those connections, that's not possible in the real world, right? And moreover, the materials and the finishes that a designer puts in place, because they're the ideal, they're often 10 times as expensive as what the installer or the sub is going to use. And usually it is much better to let the construction specialists select the proper methods and materials and processes to meet the designer's minimum criteria, right? The time, the effort, the cost, and the data storage requirements of extended BIM data is very often a total waste on most projects. And you're just better off using a simpler 3D modeling tool so that everyone can visualize and understand the design concept and detail it out as they need to in the most effective way. So how about that one, Rocker? Right? What seems to be the level of understanding on using basic 3D models for construction with our client base, right? Do they feel it's what they need, or do you find that most folks are still just like, oh, we got to have the BIM?
No, they don't. On the construction, and like I was saying before, BIM is the extreme. Most of it's 2D and 3D. But a lot of it's still in 2D. It's like you're describing. It's just too complex, too expensive. You need the resources, and not many people have enough resources today. So it's just simpler and easier to work with in 2D or 3D.
Okay, fair enough. So look, 3D modeling is a powerful tool, and I'm a fan of it for almost all jobs. Not because, as most of the software developers are going to tell you that, 2D is dead. It's not, right? Like Rock was just saying, it's still massive use, and it's going to stay that way. Right? But I like 3D because you can use the 3D models to intelligently plan and coordinate a design. And then you can just extract 2D plans and sections and details from the 3D model for use by the builders who can easily understand those 2D plans that they're looking at. But not just that, but the 3D model is a key component for most BIM VDC interactions, right? They can handle with just the 3D model. They can do conflict checks and part counts and estimates, and even add some basic metadata after the fact, or extract out details that maybe they aren't clear in the 2D design. And they can do that with any number of modern tools without, I guess, having to sort through and filter out just ridiculous amounts of BIM data that's been put in by the engineers that really has no net benefit in the real construction process. Now look, Revit works 3D models just fine, all right? But the truth is that so do a lot of other more cost-effective and simpler to use tools. Okay, Autodesk or AutoCAD really itself, right, can handle this itself, right? You can get in base AutoCAD, some really nice 3D designs when you use like their architectural or mechanical overlay packages for basic AutoCAD. And then you have other systems, right? Tools like BricsCAD BIM, right? And I know, just ignore the name. It's a marketing thing. But BricsCAD BIM is one of my favorite 3D modelers. And it can automate development of building information in a really dramatic way. What I really like is you can just go into a tool like BricsCAD BIM, and you can just build out the model, drop in walls and doors and steel, and then you can just let BricsCAD start identifying and categorizing the model for basic BIM information, right? In other words, what's on a given floor, or is this a piece of the ceiling, or is that a floor component or a wall component or a door, right? It's very easy to go in and automate that process of adding BIM data that is actually relevant to constructability, right? Rather than, hundreds of predefined, Revit part families with so much data in them. It takes hours to sort through and find, all I wanted was the rough opening. There were 3,000 components I had to sort through, right? And a tool like, BricsCAD BIM, it's even going to let you do things like draft out a 3D detail, right? Say, hey, I'm going to do a little 3D connection point in this corner for how this concrete wall is going to intersect with the other wall. And then you can just apply that design to every instance of those intersections, maybe 300 instances of that on your job. You just go, yep, that's how I want it done. Push it everywhere, and it updates and handles all your details, right? So that's the kind of stuff where you kind of get this, 3D BIM intersectionality, right? And when you take that and you combine a lot of these lower cost tools, they have the ability, like I was saying earlier, to extract your 2D plans, etc., whatever you need, details, sections, in just a few minutes, your elevations, they pull them right out from the 3D models. Okay. And that's much more useful to the construction world. And look, here's what I will say, right? Most of those systems are usually simple enough for a construction firm to adapt and learn so that they can make design adjustments or be able to find the data that they need and see the results of changes and alterations in pretty close to real time on their jobs. Revit, while it is a brilliant design tool, and I'm a huge fan of it, it's just too expensive and it is too difficult to master for anybody who is not a full-time designer, right? If you're not, you really shouldn't even be considering it. Look, the one last thing that I will point out is that when you're working with just 3D models, right, whether it's from a tool like BricsCAD or another one, and you can do this in Revit too, right? They let you extract dynamic 2D plans from the model, right? So in other words, if your VDC guy goes into the 3D model, right, that he got from the architect and he updates the location of a door in the model, the 2D plan that your field guys want is immediately updated and is ready for use on the site, right? And that's the functionality that we need, right? And Revit and large systems like that do this, but the complexity of making that happen in those systems, at least in my mind, it kills it for those of us in the construction space, right? We're looking for tools that are simple to use, that dynamically update with only the information that we actually need to build things, right? And hence the reason I tell folks, make sure that you know whether or not you really need a true BIM before you invest your money in packages that will handle that, right? Look at the lower cost options, okay? All right, folks, so with that, we're gonna get out of here and we'll let you all get back to your busy day. And I know I ticked off a lot of people with this conversation today. And if anybody wants to get mad and complain, please feel free to call and yell at Rocco. So that's what he's here for. So, all right, folks, we're out of here. We'll catch you next time on the Cattle Call Podcast. All right, everybody, today's Cattle Call was brought to you courtesy of Zentech Consultants. That's Rocco and I. Zentech Consultants works with design and manufacturing firms to help our clients purchase and implement the software that they need in these complex industries. We provide a single point of contact for clients to buy, develop, and learn the most vital software systems for your specific needs. Zentech strives to be your trusted technology partner from your initial needs all the way through long-term support and training for your entire staff. So Rocco, why don't you tell them how to reach out to Zentech?
All right, yeah, you can reach out to us through zentechconsultants.net. You can email us at sales@zentechconsultants.net, or you can even call us 866-824-4459.
Excellent. We look forward to hearing from y'all.